The last thing I see my dad as I turned around was him, hovering away from the ship, starting in this new world with absolutely nothing, a pair of shirt and boxer shorts.
People were jumping, and your mom had to basically just drop your sister to a sailor that's catching people.
One of the things I do remember is tasting military peanut butter in the can that you rolled up.
Sure,
and chiclets, military chiclets. The first thing he said when he got on the ship, it wasn't like, "Where's my wife and kids?" He's like, "Give me a cigarette."
Oh my God, this is something people need to know. It's real. It happened. It happened to your family specifically. It really is great for you to tell this story. And like you said, it's the 50th anniversary. It's one of those that truth is braver than fiction.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are talking to author Mickey Nguyen. He's actually the son of Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Van Ba. His father was a South Vietnamese pilot who escaped Vietnam with his family when the country was falling to the communists that were coming down from the north. His father's heroic actions, including a daring helicopter escape in April of 1975, was featured in the 2015 Oscar-nominated film Last Days in Vietnam and are chronicled in the new memoir, which we're going to talk about, The Last Flight Out. With the 50th anniversary of the Fall of Saigon approaching here in 2025, Mickey aims to connect with audiences interested in this. We really enjoyed this interview with Mickey. He had some incredible stories to tell, and I really hope you guys stick around for this story and the story of what Mickey's father did in getting his family out of the country was just mind-blowing.
Yeah, so let's talk with history.
Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jenn.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there.
They came to this ship, the USS Kirk. The larger helicopter couldn't land on the Kirk because it was too big and it would have destroyed the ship. He was running out of gas. So we hovered over the Kirk, and he throws his family,
including a baby, right?
Including an 8-month-old baby, a 2-year-old, 5-year-old, throws them off of the deck of the helicopter onto the deck of the USS Kirk, which is probably 18 feet drop, into the hands of these servicemen.
We are here with Mickey Nguyen. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
That's right.
And you are here talking about a book that's really about your father, and you've been carrying on this message. And just as we were talking before we started recording here, you've been doing these interviews, and there's been Oscar-nominated films with your father, who was part of that storyline, and all this really, really interesting stuff. So Mickey, for our listeners and for those watching, can you tell us a little bit about your book, kind of your journey with your father? There's a whole lot of stuff for us to cover here, so I'll let you jump into things that you think will resonate with folks who might be interested in your book.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Scott and Jenn, for the opportunity to be on here and to share my family story. And again, I come at it, this is my family story. Every family's got their own unique stories, and everyone's got their own unique history. But this one involved my father, who passed away about 10 years ago. But what he did 50 years ago, coming up here, April 29th, April 30th, 1975, was very heroic. So much so that he shared, as with any military folks, post-activity, we'd share his story of how he got to America here with his other, Vietnamese veteran buddies here in the U.S., and as well as around dinner tables when I was younger, and hearing his story and experienced it myself as a 6.5-year-old boy in 1975. And so, long story short, the U.S. Navy in 2009, mind you, the incident that happened 50 years ago, we never got the name of the ship, which is the USS Kirk, nor the name of the captain, Captain Paul Jacobs, after we, got onto the ship, because they had to continue to stay around the Gulf of Tonkin to, continue their activity mission. And then our family had to, get whisked off to another boat and ship and start a new life in America. And so flash forward to 2009, finally, the U.S. Navy, Mr. Jan Herman, he is a U.S. Navy historian and did some research on the activities in 1975 and the, Operation Frequent Wind, which was the evacuation of U.S. personnel and others within supporting the U.S. military efforts in the South Vietnam Saigon area.
Yeah.
Had to quickly flee as the communists came down and took over Saigon. And so when Mr. Jan Herman did the research, found out, this pilot who ditched his helicopter after his family jumped onto the ship. Finally, the story was shared, with the Vietnamese community, and it ended up that my mom got an email saying, "Hey, we're looking for this pilot." And my mom sent me the email, and she said, "Hey, take a look at it." And then I was at work, and the full life story of our family circled around where, wow, the U.S. Navy, reached out and tried to find this pilot. And I said, "Hey, if you're looking for the pilot that ditched the Chinook at, this approximate time afternoon, that's more than likely my dad."
Oh, wow.
And so back then, 15 years ago, he dementia, Alzheimer's, so he wasn't able to, communicate. And so I spoke on his behalf. But myself, my mom, family, just extremely happy to reconnect back with the captain and everyone. And so I'll get more into the dramatic story, but so much so that the U.S. Navy put together, Jan Herman, the team there, put together a documentary themselves.
Oh, cool.
And then eventually, a couple years later, in 2010, a year later, my family, dad, mom, sister, flew out to Washington, D.C. to do a reunion with the USS Kirk. And the documentary, we got a chance to see the U.S. Navy documentary. It was called The Lucky Few.
Okay.
And their first time interviewing with NPR.
Oh, yeah.
And was able to not only share the story through NPR, but also got the chance to shake the hand of the captain, thanked him, thanked the crew members. They took a big risk themselves, standing underneath the Chinook helicopter,
Yeah.
to catch us as we jumped. And so the story continued to snowball. A year later or two, got a phone call from a production team that was American, part of the NPR network, and said that a film company, LA, we want to produce their version of it. And it just so happened that the director, the producer, was Rory Kennedy and her company, Moxie Film. And so Rory Kennedy, youngest daughter of Robert F. Kennedy, her brother is JFK Jr. If I got, and so, so in 2013, got the chance to talk about it in the last days of Vietnam.
Yep.
And out of, we didn't know, but it got shortlisted, out of 130, I was told about 130 documentaries submitted for 2014, 2015 Oscars.
Yeah.
It got shortlisted down to 5. So just amazing from that standpoint.
Cool.
That's absolutely amazing. And just to kind of to step back for, I looked a little bit at some of the links that you had sent us, and there's been some news stories and for our listeners, and what I'll do is I'll cut in some of the news stories and reels, in the earlier part of the interview, so they get that foundation. But really, you said you were 6.5 when you guys were basically evacuating out of the Saigon area.
So should I get into the story?
Well, let me ask you this question real fast. Mickey, when you're like, that's probably my father, how many helicopters ditched leaving Saigon? Was there more than one?
Well, you see in Time Life magazine and in video many of the smaller Huey. Right?
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, they landed on the deck because it was small enough to land on this particular deck of the USS Kirk.
Yeah, and so
and then they pushed it over the over the side.
So then they would push him to
okay.
get more on, because
Right,
they're not
right.
going to like put him in a hangar. They're just going to push him off, and then
Yeah, and then
have other
the
ones
next
land.
one would land.
Yeah, but your father is the only one that actually ditched his aircraft. Like he was the pilot.
Like
He
flew it into the water.
He pilot and ditched it. Like he did an active
Simply
ditch.
because it was just too big to land. There's no room.
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Chinooks are big. I've flown in Chinooks before.
They-
Those are
yeah.
large aircraft.
Way too big for a frigate.
Yeah.
But there was no other pilot that did that. So when you're like, it's probably my dad, it's probably because he's the only one who ditched an aircraft.
Well, as far as I know, now if there's
Yeah.
others that have done that out there, it wasn't at least shared in the community or
Sure.
talked about very much. So I don't know,
Yeah,
but
we don't-
I do know
yeah.
about my dad.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Okay.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make sure, because you're like, that's probably my dad. I'm like, wow. I was wondering how many. I know that they pushed the aircraft off. I know they were just getting the aircraft out and getting people out as quickly as possible. But when I read about your father actively ditching, something that we practice now in the Navy, but probably something he never practiced, and he just did it off of what he knew as a pilot. It's so interesting because from what the Navy probably saw him do, they're probably like, okay, now we're going to train people to do that. Because it worked.
Things happen.
Well, yeah. Fortunately, it did. Right? It's
Yeah.
either death or survival in this case. But from what I've heard and in talking with other Navy folks, I think they train them to just hover over and then kill the prop and then let it sink.
Yep, sink and roll. But
Yeah.
just like your father did, you get everybody out of the aircraft but the pilot. Just like your father did. Same scenario, right? That's the highest chance for survival, is to get everyone out and let the pilot do an active ditch, and because then you can control it. So I think that's really cool. Your dad was like a trend center. He was a groundbreaker there.
Yeah, just survival. Do what you had to do. Think quick on
Yeah.
your feet. Yeah. So
Yeah, so let's tell the story. Let's tell the story of from your 6.5, what's happening in Vietnam at the time. Your father is a South Vietnamese officer. He's a pilot. Vietnam is falling. What's going on with South Vietnamese people? And tell us the story of your family's survival.
So yeah, I'll try to condense it as much as possible. But there are fun parts in there that it's like,
Sure.
Yeah, there's just some interesting parts in there. But for those that may not know the full history of Vietnam, it was a country highly desired in terms of where its location, close to the water, been occupied by China, French occupation for hundreds of years, through its history. And most recent, leading up to 1975, was the desire to be independent, the way that independent from the French and other things. But in this particular case, the communists wanted to, gain control of the country. And my dad, being from the South, with support from the U.S., was involved, trained with Americans in the early 60s. He had a chance a couple times to come over to Alabama and to Texas for flight training. And so, what he decided to focus more around helicopters and get training around that. And so fast forward to the last few months leading up to April 29, 1975, the communists were coming down and encircling the city of Saigon. And at this moment in time, I was, again, 6.5. So I'm sharing the story from my perspective. But
Sure.
as we talk about the book itself, he wrote many of these stories himself. And but the way that I'll narrate is from my perspective. But knowing that the communist was about to come down, he knew that it was time to start making option A or option B and perhaps option C if things didn't turn out well. But as we all know, the communists did come down. And the last few nights, my family, my mom and I, younger brother, younger sister, had to, go to our grandma's house, which is basically in the middle of Saigon.
Okay.
And he told us to go there. And he told us that, in the event of things just falling apart, I'm going to come and get you somehow, some way. We'll figure out this out. We'll figure out option B. Because if he would have gotten caught or captured, it would have been many years of re-education camp, which is hell.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, his buddies and family members who didn't get the chance to leave had to, you know, deal with just that constant of activity. But in knowing what he knew, hearing intelligence in the radio and his superiors and his commanding officers and everybody else simply knowing that it's, you know, there is no other option. They took off with their family. He waited for orders until the very last moment, where at this time there was no further orders for him to, you know, to execute this or execute that, because again, his superiors took off themselves.
Yeah, everybody was trying to save their families.
Exactly. Exactly. And so at this point, he, you know, he had what he called his horse, right? His Chinook. There's the only thing that he can ride in and out of. They bombed the main airport, Tangsanyak Airport.
Okay.
And so you couldn't take a big, you know, plane en route. So he flew the Chinook helicopter into the city towards my grandma's house. And mind you, this was like, you know, any metropolitan major city. And just land, you know, Jen, you know Chinooks, right? The C-47 is loud, thunderous. You can hear that from miles away.
Oh, yeah.
And it causes a commotion. But the net here is he landed that thing in front of my grandma's playfield, little schoolyard or playfield in the front. And obviously, you know, caused a lot of commotion in the neighborhood. And many of the homes back then had tin roofs and blew many of those things up in a way. But told his co-pilot is lower the back hatch, and we all ran in and to the back of the Chinook and, you know, took that thing up quickly. There were folks that were military police around there, you know, rushing towards him, and so we had to get the heck out of there.
Sure. So let me ask you this. So you went to your grandma's house, I would assume because of the protection, as it's more central to the city, it's going to take longer for the North Vietnamese to get into the center of the city. So he's like, get there for protection. Plus he has the LZ there. So he has a landing zone picked out because of the playground. Now, were you the only family to get on board? I mean, did other families see this and want to try to save themselves too?
Yeah, my dad's side has a lot of oldest, you know, son in the family. He had a lot of brothers, my aunts and uncles. But they, you know, as we were running into the Chinook, my mom would look back, hey, come on with us. But they said,
People
no,
were still unsure.
Go with your husband.
Okay.
From that standpoint. And the reason why we were at my grandma's house was because we were living in Bien Hoa, which was about half hour away, a military base.
Sure.
And obviously the military base was probably too hot of a zone to be there. So that's why he moved to our family, to grandma.
So it's just immediate family. No uncles or aunts came. Your grandmother didn't come. No cousins.
No,
it was just you guys. Okay.
Yeah. No, many of them, you know, back then, you know, who was to say where my dad would go and how it would end up? And
sure.
so,
Nobody knew what was happening.
Yeah.
So
perhaps some regret here and there from the family members not going, but eventually some of them, you know, had the chance to leave. Yeah. So basically got out of Saigon, got out of that area and headed further south just to get away from the city and to consolidate with his other pilots.
Sure.
Trying to figure out the next thing. And the thought was to get food, gas, just gear up and try to find a remote island further south, just lay low and then figure out from there. And that's what we did. That's what my dad did, was just met up with, you know, radioed the other pilots and met at a location and to figure out what the next thing to do was. But he heard on the radio a lot of U.S. communication chatter. He also knew many of the U.S. ships that were still out in the Pacific there. And the thought was maybe go out there and check it out. And if there's a ship that was big enough, maybe to land on it and get out of town, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what he did. He flew out towards the ocean. There was not an exact point. He just flew out there to check it out. And mind you, Jen, you probably know they don't have flotation devices or any life jackets. At least with this Chinook that my dad had. And so it was a risky effort to go out there not knowing exactly, you know, what's going to be out there and if maybe he had enough gas to make it out or to figure all that out. But eventually flew out there and on the distance he saw, you know, a ship and headed in that direction. And And as he got close to it, he eventually, throttled back a little bit. Didn't want to look too aggressive,
Sure.
obviously, because, the American Navy men below,
Weren't sure
everybody
who
was
it was.
heightened
Yeah.
tension, right? Not knowing
Yeah.
if this was a communist, plane coming out and doing wrong to the ship. So as he approached it, my mom, him, and others, and there was like about 15, 16 people somewhere in the Chinook, our family, and he had a co-pilot and his gunner and maintenance guy and their girlfriends and things like that. So
Yeah.
hovered up there, and we can see the ship below continuing to maintain its course, or just 3 or 5 knots. And he kept hovering it and circling around it, while at the same time that you can see the folks below holding big guns up at him, just to like, hey, we got our eye on you. And so
Yeah.
Like a warning.
yeah, just exactly. And so my dad, with his broken English, that he can speak, was able to communicate with the captain in the ship. And finally, the Captain Paul Jacobs, talked with his crew and started to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to, help this guy and the folks in the Chinook? And so in the video, there's a video in the film where you can see my mom holding up Mina, my
Yeah.
baby sister, 6-month-old, up to the window and say, "Hey, there's women and kids
Yeah.
on board here. We need help." And so with the compassion and the heart of the Mr. Paul Jacobs, quickly just scrambling to figure things out. And so finally, okay, guys, we got to help the pilot up there in the Chinook up there. And so basically what my dad did was, and again, the ship had to maintain a steady course, right? Maintain a steady course. And so he hovered the Chinook towards the stern, the rear side. And obviously this particular USS Kirk, found out later on, was a submarine, a destroyer type,
Yeah.
where it was looking for sonar and just a lot of expensive equipment, very high tech back then,
Oh,
antennas,
okay.
radars, all of the surveillance. And so my dad didn't want to get too close to all the mass and the
Sure.
equipment, because it can put that ship out of commission quickly. Anything could have happened,
Sure.
a wind or a swell could have knocked, the Chinook into to the boat. And so he hovered behind, falling behind. He hovered the Chinook behind the ship, and on the starboard door, opened the door, and hovered it, lowered it down, and we can see, hovered it about 10, 13 feet above the deck, and we can see the American Navy men below, hands up, and jump, right? One by
Wow.
one, we jump.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And the last few that left the Chinook, my mom had to drop a 7-month-old baby,
Wow.
onto the hand below. That gentleman who caught my sister, his name is Mr. Chipman. Met him in Washington,
wow.
D.C. Yeah, Texan.
That's amazing.
And just amazing reunion. But Mr. Chipman and others down there, brave Navy men, risked their life as well, just to help us out. And so we all got down. I jumped down, and the only injury was one of the girlfriends of one of the crew member just sprained her ankle. But fortunately, everyone
Yeah.
was okay. They quickly pushed us inside. You didn't want any kids or anybody running out on the deck, right?
Sure.
And so the last thing I see of my dad as I turned around was him, hovering away from the ship. And so went inside, and that was it. For my own eyes, that was the last time I saw my dad. Everything else was just hearing stories of him telling it, and
Sure.
eventually seeing all of the photos and everything else from the U.S. Navy many years later. But as I share this with you through what my dad shared with me through dinner tables, as we grew up, he hovered away from the ship, 100 yards or so, and hovered the Chinook on the water so he can take off all of his gear and his gun, his sidearm, and the flak jacket, right? I mean, it's hard to put that on, let alone take it off while he's
Get all the
hovering.
weight off. Yeah.
Yeah. Shoes, boots, unstrapping all that. His only regret in this whole experience was, and the only reason why I found out was because of the book, the section that he wrote. But the regret was that he should have asked his co-pilot to at least hold the rudder so that he can take all of his stuff out. Once he's down, then tell the co-pilot to jump, right?
Yeah.
So he laughingly said, next time if I have to do this again, I'm going to tell the co-pilot to just give me like 5 minutes. And also the other regret was not keeping his military ID.
Yeah.
All of the ID stuff. Everything was gone. I'm telling you. He started in this new world with absolutely nothing, a pair of shirt and boxer shorts.
That's amazing.
So down to his undergarment, and hovered there, kicked the port door in the left side out.
Yep.
And basically with his right leg pushed the rudder so that it would lean towards the right as he jumped over to his left into the water.
Yeah.
And he said the destroyers around the dinner table tried to dive into the ocean, but tried it 2 or 3 times, but the salt water is very buoyant. Kept pushing him back up. That was his biggest fear, was a shrapnel or a blade or something just in the water, right? Or the dynamics of the Chinook could have flipped back on him.
Sure.
Right? Because you can't really jump too far if you just from this huge aircraft. But fortunately, it leaned over to the right. He was on the left. And quickly on the third attempt diving, he dove down, and finally, as I said in the film, he pops back up, and he's alive, and it's like just a huge relief. They sent the little skiff to come out and grab him, and we can see the video of him sitting in the boat, just like probably thinking, God, thank God Almighty, I made it.
Gosh.
And the first thing he said when he got on the ship, he wasn't like, "Where's my wife and kids?" He's like, "Give me a cigarette."
Oh my gosh, that's
Calm
awesome.
that nerve down.
Absolutely.
That's so funny. That's so 70s.
I can't imagine how. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's such a pilot thing. It's awesome.
Oh my gosh.
So a couple things, I want to remind people, this is a frigate. It's 15 feet off the water. If he's hovering about 10 feet off the frigate, he's 25 feet off the ground. The frigate has to maintain a course, even a low course, just to keep it steady.
Yep.
Because those South China Seas are so big that if you were to stop, you're like, why doesn't he just stop? And they can hover. It's going to rock so much that he's going to be unable to hover, especially at the side. He has to hover to the side. He's not hovering straight on. He's hovering to the side to open the door to let people jump out.
Yeah.
And because he's doing that, he's probably looking over his shoulder to maintain the hover. And you have to maintain some kind of speed on the ship to keep it as steady as possible. So, and he's doing 15 people. So this is taking some time. This is not just like 2 seconds. This is taking some time to do.
And what people don't realize too, right? If you've ever spent time on a ship, and have both of us haven't been in the Navy, the sea state has a lot to do with that. Not only, there's multiple things that a factor here, right? A Chinook, if our listeners don't quite know what a Chinook is or can't picture it in their head, picture that classic MASH helicopter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dual rotors, kind of a little bit longer. And so that's what he's flying, that CH-46. And then on the ocean, you'll have swells sometimes, depending on the sea state, that are changing how high the ship is by like 5 to 6 feet. And sometimes it's even 10 to 15 feet just on the swell. Right. So the ship, you can fly the helicopter steady, but you also have to keep an eye on the ship, because the ship is the thing that's moving. It's actually the helicopter is actually a little bit easier to keep steady, whereas the ship, again, depending on the sea state. So that's an incredibly dangerous thing to do, and it's a miracle, and praise God that everybody came out okay, and that people were jumping, and your mom had to basically just drop your sister to a sailor that's catching people. If our listeners can picture that in their head, and then your father flying off to the side, rolling it one way and jumping off the other, all of this stuff is happening, I'm sure, in a relatively short period of time.
Your dad is an excellent pilot. And then I want people to remember the deck of a ship is steel. So people are jumping down onto a steel deck. And you guys are probably rushed into the hangar right behind there because to get people off the deck, clear the deck as quick as possible to get more people on as there's people on the deck catching these people. And I love that your mom held up your sister because it's like an international symbol of peace, a child.
Yeah. Help. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I love all that. So we're leading into that. Your father has ditched the aircraft, which I think is amazing. Like you said, you're not going to jump away from the aircraft. You're basically jumping beside the aircraft.
Yeah.
You don't have like this long lateral distance, and you have to get over the cyclic. Like he has to get his leg over the cyclic and then jump over the collective into the water. So he's taken off all his weight so he can dive, like you said, and hopefully the aircraft will roll. All the weight of a helicopter is in the top. So hopefully the helicopter will roll because the weight will pull it over. And like you said, he'll dive to hit all of everything flying off of it because it's an active rotor at the time as it's going in. And I just think it's great that he gets rescued with nothing but his skivvies on and then asks for a cigarette. He's like, I did it. It's such a pilot thing. Like, look, I did the most badass thing. None of you pilots did this. And I need a cigarette.
Oh, my word.
So are you going to see him again on the ship? Like, are you guys reunited as a family on the ship? And then...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then transported to a bigger ship because I'm sure the refugees coming in are so high that they need to get you on a bigger ship that can handle more people. Because a frigate is not. It's like 150 people on board.
Yeah. We were only on there for less than 24 hours before another ship came by to offload. Right, and the USS Kirk stayed in the area.
Yeah, and a frigate too. I mean, I was on a frigate for my first deployment. They can get closer to shore. Or the draft is smaller. So the draft of a ship is how much it sticks underneath the water. A frigate, because it's smaller, because it's the lower crew, you can get closer to the water. So they like to get the frigates, close and to offer some support. So I think that's another reason why the Kurt was probably closer for your dad when he was coming out. Yeah. But I think that's great. And if I remember correctly, the commanding officer was like a 6'3" big guy.
Oh, just the big heart, big guy. I got goose pimples thinking about him. He passed away a few years ago in his 90s.
Wow.
But what a wonderful gentleman, a wonderful crew, big heart. Towards the last few years in 2016, 17, we were trying, with his help and others, we were trying to get the U.S. Navy to formally recognize his humanitarian and compassionate, effort towards not only our family, but hundreds and hundreds of other families that basically did the same thing, was, fly various planes and helicopters out to help. And Mr. Paul Jacobs, Captain Paul Jacobs, I'll keep repeating that until the day I die, was one of those gentlemen that just, put aside any sort of protocols or any of this and that, and just from one human to the next human, I'm going to help you out.
Yeah.
And for that, myself, my family, and my dad fully appreciate that. 100%.
Yeah, that's what we love about the U.S. Navy too. So that's great. And where was Jacobs from? Do you know?
Virginia.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah, around the D.C. area.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're on the ship, and how long until you get to America? And I think you go to Washington State, right?
Yeah. So there's so many parts of the story that I have to filter myself because we can sit here and talk for hours and hours. But yeah, again, on there for 24 hours, and then another ship came by to offload us with hundreds of others, and from one ship from there we went to Wake or Guam,
Yep.
and then eventually Hawaii.
Yep.
And then went into Camp Pendleton, Marine Camp Pendleton in San Diego.
Yeah.
And was there for a month or so. And then a Cross of Christ Lutheran Church. Again, so many amazing people along the journey to help, to help us. Cross of Christ Lutheran Church here in Bellevue, which is about 30 minutes away from Seattle, sponsored our family and helped us resettle from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, for you, I mean, being 6.5, kind of all this stuff going on, do you have a lot of kind of like specific memories yourself? Like I know for me, if I try to think back to my youth, usually it's like I'll remember one specific thing about something that happened. Like, oh my gosh, look at this ship, and someone gave me, ice cream or something like that. Like, do you have any memories like that of like being on the ship yourself and interacting with the sailors as you're leaving and coming to Guam and then Hawaii and everything?
Yeah. That's a great question because we all reflect back on our childhood and there are moments and memories where it's like it stands out. For me, 6.5, growing up on a military base and playing with guns and I mean they're guns and all bullets and heavy military just laying around the barrack and the playing around all that. But to answer your question on the ship itself, one of the things I do remember is tasting military peanut butter in the can that you rolled up.
Sure,
and chiclets, military
They were
chiclets.
in the
hand out.
MREs.
Specific to your question, those are the things that I remember.
'Cause a kid.
Eating it. Yeah, exactly on the ship, and we see photos. My dad's sitting there on the ship, just kind of like chilling, talking with his buddies, and I'm brother running around the ship there. So. But yeah, the taste of that peanut butter, I can taste it right now.
That's
the
so
military peanut butter ration.
Yeah, I love stories like that because for me, that's always what there's very specific things, and it's not something you would ever think of, right? It's a smell that triggers an old memory or something you taste that just takes you right back, to 30, 40, 50 years prior.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about that as you were telling this story. I was like, I'm sure there's like one thing that he just really remembers, and it makes sense to me that for a kid, right, it's something that you're going to taste, for the first time. So
Right.
I absolutely love that. Now for the book, did your father write the better portions of this book and then it was finished up by you like towards the end, or how did that book get put together?
Yeah. So as we settled it, in the Seattle area here, eventually, came back and worked, studied electronics, and eventually my mom and dad, the irony, landed after a few jobs here and there, landed with Boeing, retired with Boeing.
Oh my
the
gosh.
makers of the Chinook. My dad worked on with the space program. Back then, Cold War, ICBMs, all of that program. So he had fortunately military, support military to get involved with projects like that.
Sure.
And in his spare time, he loved writing. And he wrote in obviously Vietnamese, still broken English, had to relearn. My mom had to learn English from scratch, settle and just worked hard, sacrifice, all of those themes of having to start over again. But in this case, he had free time, and when he did have free time, wrote a lot in short stories that were published in Vietnamese newspapers, not only in Seattle, but in other Vietnamese communities all over the U.S. And so he wrote several stories. And in the past few years, I was able to finally find many of these files, Word documents, laying around, and got it translated. Leaving Vietnam, I left 1 year old. I mean, not first grade. Right?
Yeah.
And so didn't get to go further into my own Vietnamese language and assimilated quickly into America, into living in a new country. And so, in the past year here, was able to compile all of this. And one of the things my mom told me was that his dream was to actually put his own book together, right, of all the short stories that he had. Unfortunately, with all Alzheimer's took him early, and didn't get a chance to do that. And so I wanted to honor him, and the timing was right in terms of 50 years since in 2025 here, that we reflect back 50 years of the fall of Saigon, and so the timing was right, and hence putting all this together, the book.
That's great.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that you were able to do that because you get to re-experience some of that. I'm sure as you're collecting those stories together and then reading back through them, putting them together, that anything you do like that, any project like that, right? And I'm preaching to the choir, you're really going to get into that and really know how he felt. And what an amazing opportunity for you.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a historically significant story.
Yeah.
Right? This is something people need to know. It's real. It happened. It happened to your family specifically, which means you can weigh in more on the actual facts and what happened. I mean, you're a primary source. So it really is great for you to tell this story. And like you said, it's the 50th anniversary, and people are sometimes still confused about Vietnam. They're still confused about what happened there and what was it about. And I think these kind of stories need to be told by people. Like, we need to understand what was happening there and what happened to the people there, and that, what America tried to do to help. And like, even your family coming to America and, assimilating and being welcomed with open arms and being so, a country that was able to help and give you guys a new life from nothing.
Yes.
From underwear, right?
Yes.
But the heroic thing your father did to do that is just amazing. And I think more stories like this need to be told. And I think this is a fantastic, real, historic story.
They could make this into a Hollywood movie, in my opinion, right? I mean, it's a culminating event with a lot of uncertainty at the end and all the stuff at play. So I love that you got to put this book together.
Yeah, the themes of leadership, survival, overcoming obstacles, all of those things. We all go through it in our own personal way.
Really?
This is just my dad's, look at it, approach at life with it. And so the book is filled with stories of, drama, excitement, betrayal, survival, leadership, all of those things. It's embodied within this book. The and as I shared with you earlier in this conversation, this was a story that I grew up as a kid throughout my life, hearing my dad talk with his buddies, smoking a cigarette, drinking a beer, and listening in listening into these stories. And again, these were stories for many, many years. And it wasn't again until the U.S. Navy, all of this, reconnection again, 2010, 2009 timeframe, that finally saw pictures, finally saw some of these images. Wow. And I'm thinking in my head, man, my dad was telling the truth. We got pictures. It's like that fishing story, right? Your buddy, I caught that, that 25-pound salmon. Oh yeah, where's the picture? No picture, not. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So we got all those. So thank you for, again, Captain Kirk, Jan Herman, U.S. Navy, USS Kirk, all the crewmen. And the church folks that have helped us along this whole journey.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. So where can people get your book at?
Oh, Barnes and Noble, Amazon,
Okay.
just it's all online.
And then there's also the PBS special.
Yeah. So the film Last Days in Vietnam, again, written, produced by Rory Kennedy and team. It's on Netflix. Been there,
Yeah, we'll have to look.
Yeah.
We'll include links to all of that stuff in the show notes, and for the video version of this podcast, for you guys who are watching, we'll include links to everything here in the video description. And Mickey, thank you so much for reaching out to us and joining us today. We love hearing stories like this, especially as a veteran and someone who's currently serving. Veteran one day myself, and just everything that your family did in the stories that you're getting to tell of your father's heroism. We really do appreciate you coming on and joining us and telling your part of the story. And I love the little anecdotes there, about the peanut butter and the chiclets. That just makes me smile.
I wanted to fulfill my dad's dream, number one, with the book, and to honor him. It's the least I can do for him, giving so much to myself and my family, and to continue to share his story. This is, the history, right? His story.
Yeah,
this is my dad's story.
Yeah.
And so, thank you both, Scott and Jen, for the opportunity for me to be on your platform and share my family story.
Yeah, well, we're excited to get this out there and to share this with our audience, and hopefully people go check out the book. Remind me of the official name of the book.
Oh, The Last Flight Out.
The last flight out.
Flight Out, yeah.
And is that the helicopter?
That's him. That's
Wow.
right there.
Yep.
All right, so folks, check out go to our show notes and check out The Last Flight Out. And Mickey, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
God
you
bless
both.
you.
Thank you.
Jen, I enjoyed his story so much. It was hard to fathom. And then hearing him tell it from his perspective as a 6.5-year-old was just riveting.
You know, it's one of those that truth is braver than fiction. You know, like what his father did is stuff that movies are made out of. It's stuff you see in movies that you're like, there's no way that could happen. There's no way that would work. And it did in his case.
Yeah.
And what his dad did without any training, he just did it. I mean, a father's heart to get his family safe and out of a country that's about to fall. Like, it was just amazing. And to celebrate this on the 50th anniversary of the Fall of Saigon, more people need to understand what's happening in Vietnam and the repercussions of that and what a refugee crisis looks like. In this case, it was amazing to tell the story.
It was amazing. I loved some of the anecdotes that he told us about the peanut butter and the chiclets. If you guys are interested in this book, please look in the video description or the podcast show notes description for a link to The Last Flight Out. This has been a Walk with History production. Talk with History is created and hosted by me, Scott Benny. Episode researched by Jennifer Benny. Check out the show notes for links and references mentioned in this episode. Talk with History is supported by our fans at thehistoryroadtrip.com. Our eternal thanks to those providing funding to help keep us going. Thank you to Doug McLiverty, Larry Myers, and Patrick Benny. Make sure you hit that follow button in your podcast player, and we'll talk to you next time.